I'm Will Stolerman. I'm the head of podcasts at Secret Leaders. And Secret Leaders at the moment is one podcast. It's a weekly interview show with entrepreneurs. So we speak to founders of startups like Monzo, Slack, BrewDog, Jo Malone, basically to find out how they've done it, the highs, the lows, the learnings. So we do that on a weekly basis, but we're also launching new podcasts. So we've just got financing for a show about Hong Kong's most notorious gangster. It's a story I've wanted to tell for 10 years. So I used to be a journalist in Hong Kong, so I'm pumped about that. So he was seen as this criminal genius born into a criminal family. He was lavish with his money, hence why he was called Big Spender. And I don't want to spoil too much, but his most notable crime was he kidnapped the son of the richest man in Hong Kong. He turned up at this tycoon's house with a bomb vest strapped to his chest and said, "I want 2 billion Hong Kong dollars, which is about sort of 250 million US, or you're never seeing your son again." And Li Ka-shing said, "Well, I can't get you that tonight, but I can get you half of it." And such was the power of the man, he called up HSBC, who opened up the vaults, and he handed over 130 million US dollars to this guy. Although that was the pinnacle of his crimes, we think that's just a small part of the story. So we're really excited about that. I've always basically been at the intersection of media and tech. I've always loved stories. That's how I started my career out in Hong Kong as a journalist. I then became the editor of this little magazine out there, a startup. I then wanted to launch my own startup, so I came back and raised some seed capital, built a team. This was sort of 2013 to sort of 16. The business ultimately failed. I was quite disillusioned with journalism. It's very difficult to make money. So then I went into tech. I joined Monzo, and I was pretty early within that startup's rise. So that was an epic experience. I did that for a few years, and now I'm back in stories, which it's a similar problem. I love stories, but there's very little money in it. It's a funny one, because often you think that this will be an interesting chat, because you know the brand, you know the person, or whatever, and you think, okay, well, you've dug into it and you think it'll be fantastic, but then you come to record it and it's not amazing. It's basically about how willing the guest is to share and to get emotional, to talk about emotional topics. So they ran this study a few years ago of basically what is the easiest channel through which to lie. And television, film and TV, was the easiest. And the toughest was actually audio, because I don't know if it's because your senses get shut off, but you pick up so much just from the voice. So when we're interviewing people, we're really trying to get to that authentic emotion. If it's just sort of like knocking it back in a PR sort of like plant, then it doesn't matter how good on paper the guest is. That's what we're really trying to get at, sort of the stuff that makes them feel something. And that's the stuff that will make the listener feel something. Yeah, there's definitely that phenomenon of people are more open, more vulnerable. I also think we focus on interviewing founders because they tend to be more open. We've tried interviewing CEOs of companies that you might even consider startups, scale-ups, but they weren't part of the founding team, and often it's then that we've got bad interviews. I don't know, there's something about like when you founded it yourself, you think of it as it's a part of you. People talk about their companies like as their babies, and I think then you get the stories, whereas when it's a CEO who's been brought in, then you tend not to get people telling you the juicy stuff. There's so many, but a few of the ones that surprised me actually. So Trini, as in from Susanna and Trini days, you know, what not to wear. She's got a startup, a beauty startup called Trini London. And I thought it'd be cool because she was Trini, but actually she's a great storyteller, and she's got some brilliant yarns as well. And so she talks a bit about the major failure that she had with her first startup and what she learned from it, lost money. She talks actually really openly about her finances, which is interesting because it's like she's had to really scrap because she had to sell her clothes to she sold like 50, 60 grand's worth of clothes to keep her current business alive. Which is interesting because you view someone like that and you think, how have you got to a point where you can be in financial debt that you need to sell your clothes? But it's those kinds of stories. We want to be able to relate. We want to be able to see ourselves in these people who we see in TV, the celebrities of business, if you will. I loved that conversation. It was actually as well, one of them that really surprised me was a conversation with the Lemonade CEO. So Lemonade's an insurtech, an insurance tech company, which sounds really dull, to be honest. And it wasn't. It was amazing because he was a great storyteller, had firm interesting views about. So he is quite outspoken, actually, which is quite rare for a public CEO. So they operate mainly in the state. You know, he talks openly about gun crime. He basically was saying that to come back into the office, you need to be double jabbed. They're going to have like a zero flexibility on that policy at a time when a lot of public CEOs are, well, they just pat it back, or a political, diplomatic about it. It's often the surprising ones, actually. So not the ones on paper. We need to launch new. I mean, we're literally discussing this right now. You know, what are the bets that we're going to take? We're a bootstrap business as well. Have a limited amount of money in the bank. Making content like the big spender, the big Hong Kong gangster story is expensive, so we only get a few shots at that. We are looking at to provide more B2B podcast services, amongst other things. So people need shows to get made, they come to us to make it. People need shows to get marketed, to get sponsorship. These are areas we have expertise in. So we want to start adding that, basically like our roster of sort of things that we can do. So we're going to make our own shows, and we're going to keep doing that. But we also like to help others make, market, and sell their own shows as well. I think so. I mean, there's still a decent amount to go. I think there's about 30% in the UK. I think it's closer to 40% people listen to a podcast every week or every month regularly. So I still think there's quite a long way to go in terms of penetration. But yeah, it certainly feels that way. I think most people have now tried a podcast. And you also get podcast fiends. I mean, you get so my wife, she's a podcast fiend, just like binges on it. I think what's quite interesting about podcasts is they've entered this new space where for a lot of people, it's something to do while you're doing a menial task. It just sort of lifts the whole thing. You can be doing the dishes, whatever it might be, and suddenly you get a quality bit of entertainment, education, which didn't really exist. But I mean, we had the radio, but it's just not really seen as the same thing. And you can be really specific about your interest, the type of story, pause, play, all of that. So I think that in particular has been quite transformational. I would say, and these are now sort of like widely spread. I'd say these mantras, I don't think they're particularly original, but I've also now launched run a few startups myself, and actually living by them, I think, can be surprisingly difficult. Staying really close to your customers, and so often you'll be in a company and you'll chat with them sort of every so often, or it's not done in a particularly rigorous manner. So staying close to your customers is vital. I think you've got to build something that people truly love. I think it can be quite difficult to get at that, because often you'll have a percentage of people who like your product. But yeah, trying to get to what's known in the tech world as product market fit, which is when things really take off, and that only happens if you build something that people really love. And I made that mistake with the News Hub, my first startup. I thought that we built something people liked and it grew, but it didn't grow fast enough. So I'd say that is a big one. And then honestly, I think it's just go and do it. Part of that, I would say, like speed is important. All other things being, you're going to miss a lot of shots. Even within your startup, you're going to take a lot of bets. Like more than 50% of your marketing bets, they're not going to pay off. You should really be optimizing for just taking as many of those as possible in a shorter space of time, in obviously a coordinated manner. But I'd say those three things, without knowing more about the business. Getting a job in the first place, that's quite a big high. Someone's going to pay me money to do something, so that's always fun. I then think raising the money and launching, building the team, basically building the business such as it was for my first startup did give me immense pride. And then the lows of having to let everyone go at the end is pretty stark. Often, weirdly, the toughest times as well are the most rewarding in a funny kind of when everyone has to sort of come together, or in that case, come apart. But if you look back on them and there's sort of like there's a tenderness towards them. Monzo was frenetic throughout, but there were some epic moments, even in the times when we were having outages and stuff like that, and the bank basically was down to some degree. Even in those, I love a crisis actually, so you'd all be sort of like huddling together and trying to get through it. So it's weird, perversely some of the worst times on paper are the best. I got to sort of help project manage the launch of the current account. It's become one of the most popular current accounts in the country. So that was epic. But actually, I have to say, we haven't done it yet or anything like that, but this Hong Kong gangster story I'm so excited about, just because it's storytelling unlike I've ever done before. Even this, this is content. This tends to be more of like the bread and butter. It's what I do in the podcast, basically. It's just pure storytelling. There's journalism that will underpin it, but it's much more about a story. I think that that could end up being, you know, the highest moment when that gets released. Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously better if you can whack it out of the park on the first one. Certainly for me, and I know for quite a few others, it's not the case. You do learn a massive amount. I mean, even now, so what we're trying to do with Secret Leaders, like, I write myself an email when I leave a company to say, like, what have I learned from this? And I was looking back at the stuff that I learned from the News Hub, which was the last content business I ran. I mean, hopefully, I'm literally telling myself, don't make that mistake again with the various things that I tried to sort of pick up. So yeah, I mean, I think that you may fail, but there's obviously still a huge amount of value you get from these failure experiences. The light of the place is amazing. So I think the older I get, either I become more aware of it or I get more sensitive to it. But the winter months and all of that kind of stuff, the darkness does get me down. Frankly, just being in a beat, you know, like double ceilings and all of that is great. I've been at home all year. I really, really like the space. Actually, the art's epic as well. Like, my wife's an interior designer. She gave it the thumbs up from that perspective. So that was cool. Everyone's obviously super friendly. I've been convinced to go downstairs and try boxing, which I've talked about going boxing for 15 years, and I've been here 2 weeks and I've already been convinced to go downstairs. So, I mean, that's a good thing. That's also part of why you want to be in a place like this. You get chatting with people and then stuff happens.
So now we're going to come on to the silly ones.
Okay.
Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Mexican or Italian?
Probably Italian, but I'm going to Mexico over Christmas, New Year, and that might. Everyone says you go out there and it's just absolutely unreal.
Pancakes or waffles?
Pancakes.
City or countryside?
That's really tough. Overall, city.
Football or rugby?
Football.
Uber organised or winging it?
Winging it.
Google or Zoom?
Google.
Cat or dog? Mayfair or Shoreditch?
Shoreditch. Has anyone said Mayfair yet?
Yeah.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah.
Gosh, there's a whole vibe there I don't like. It's like another world.
Early bird or night owl?
Funnily enough, neither. So I don't know what. I don't know where I fit. On balance, night owl.
That is it, actually. Thank you very much.
Cool. Loved it. Thanks.